There's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process. Or
are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it.
You have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. Thank you very much, Director Patel. And so as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us? What are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission and am in support of the budget here. And I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law. Okay,
but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
Your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says
doesn't
no person.
say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status. The Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. But it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected, therefore it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation, and you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, but you just said you're not investigating.
No, you and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me close with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
This exchange between Senator Jeff Merkley and Kash Patel was not just tense, it cut straight to the heart of what it means to live in a constitutional democracy. Merkley pressed Patel on two critical points: the FBI's budget and, far more importantly, the basic principle of due process under the Fifth Amendment. Now, let's break this down. The Fifth Amendment guarantees that no person, not citizens only, but no person can be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's not an interpretation, that's the plain text of the Constitution. And for centuries, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed that this protection applies universally, even to non-citizens. Cases like Miranda v. Arizona and Reno v. Flores made it crystal clear: rights don't stop at citizenship papers. So, when Senator Merkley asked Patel whether immigrants who were allegedly swept off American streets and deported to El Salvador without due process had their constitutional rights violated, Patel dodged. He said, "I'm not a constitutional scholar." That's a stunning admission for someone seeking to lead the FBI. The director of the FBI doesn't need to be a constitutional scholar, but he damn well needs to know the basic guarantees of the Constitution, especially when it comes to people's liberty being stripped away. Think about it. The FBI isn't just another government office. It's a law enforcement agency with immense power over the lives of individuals. And when someone at the helm says they don't know whether due process applies to all persons, that should alarm every American. Because if those rights can be denied to immigrants today, they can just as easily be denied to citizens tomorrow. That's why Merkley's line of questioning was so important. He wasn't just nitpicking Patel's legal knowledge, he was exposing a dangerous gap in accountability and commitment to constitutional principles. Patel tried to fall back on technicalities, saying the FBI doesn't handle removal proceedings, that's another agency. But Merkley wasn't asking about who books the plane tickets. He was asking whether the FBI, as the country's premier investigative body, would investigate violations of due process itself. And Patel simply refused to say yes. That's a glaring problem. It also highlights a broader tension we're seeing across the country. Some leaders talk endlessly about law and order, yet when it comes to the rule of law, the Constitution, they're suddenly evasive. Law and order isn't about selective enforcement or partisan loyalty. It's about ensuring the same protections for everyone, whether you're a citizen, an immigrant, or someone with no papers at all. What Merkley did here was more than challenge Patel's testimony. He reminded the public, and Patel himself, that every FBI director swears an oath to uphold the Constitution. Not to pick and choose which parts they like, not to play politics with civil liberties, but to uphold it fully. And if the person seeking to lead the FBI can't clearly and unequivocally commit to defending due process for all, then that's not just a legal failing, it's a moral one. At the end of the day, this wasn't just about Kash Patel fumbling under pressure. It's about whether we as a country are going to hold our leaders accountable to the promises enshrined in our founding document. The Constitution isn't supposed to be optional. It's supposed to be the floor, the guarantee that no matter who you are, the government can't trample your rights without following the law. So, the question Senator Merkley forced us to consider is simple but profound. If someone entrusted with leading the FBI hesitates on the basics of due process, can they really be trusted to protect our freedoms? That's the takeaway here, and it's one we can't afford to ignore. If you believe leaders at the FBI and across our government should be held to the highest constitutional standard, make your voice heard. Share this, talk about it, and demand accountability. Because rights are only as strong as our willingness to defend them.